beautiful music. So you're very welcome to our session this afternoon around Ireland's role in global health. And our panel this afternoon, and indeed our audience, as Tony has mentioned in our previous session, comprises a mix of College of Business alumni. So very welcome back to alum of the College of Business and alum here of the UCD Smurfit School. Also university and college advisory board members, and of course UCD faculty and students as well. So our conversation this afternoon around Ireland's role in global health will touch on a number of global challenges, and we shall explore the intersection between medicine and management through innovation and entrepreneurship, and in bringing innovative diagnostics and therapies to everyone who needs them. So the plan for our session this afternoon is to have a keynote address from my fabulous colleague, Professor Liam Gallagher, on Ireland's contribution to global efforts in cancer research, with an opportunity for questions from you, our audience, thereafter. And then we will proceed to our panel discussion, and we have a stellar panel, again comprising a mix of alum, advisory board members and faculty as well. And again, we invite you to the conversation and to contribute. So please feel free to interject, put your hand up. I know we have colleagues who will have a mic for you to speak to. So we really look forward to it being an interactive and lively conversation. So it's with great pleasure then that I'm going to introduce you to Professor Liam Gallagher. So Liam is Professor of Cancer Biology here at the UCD School of Biomolecular and Biomedical Science. He is co-lead of an emerging virtual institute, the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute, which is the little badge I'm wearing here this afternoon. And this aims to bring together cancer researchers across the island of Ireland within an overarching research programme. Liam also serves as Scientific Director, St Vincent's UCD Cancer Centre. More recently, Liam also assumed the role of Deputy Director of Precision Oncology Ireland, a nationwide strategic research partnership funded by Research Ireland and focused on developing better treatment strategies and diagnostics for cancer patients. Liam originally graduated from the Department of Biochemistry in UCD, of course, with the first class honours degree, with a joint degree in molecular genetics and biochemistry. Subsequently, then, he obtained his PhD in Glasgow in the Cancer Research UK Beeston Laboratories. And a major focus of Liam's research is the identification and validation of candidate biomarkers for breast cancer and melanoma. Liam is a producer of award-winning research. But a little fact that many of you will not know about Liam is that he is also an award-winning actor. So very recently, UCD hosted a fundraising event for the Laura Lynn Foundation, and in that context, Liam took part in a film and was awarded the Best Male Supporting Actor. So not only is he amazing in the lab, but also on stage as well. So on that note, it's a wonderful pleasure to hand over to Liam. Thank you, Liam.
Thanks very much, Gerardine. And you didn't say that. I won it for actually my death scene, which I fell on the floor flat on my face as a sheriff in Misery. So that was my sole acting experience. So look, thanks very much. I think we have more. I'll focus on this particular screen if that's okay for our colleagues. But so what I was going to do is really just kind of talk a bit about, I suppose, particularly the role of a number of different individuals and initiatives where, say, Irish people or people from Ireland have played a significant role on a global level, but also talk about the aspect of how we might kind of tackle cancer better in terms of a team-orientated approach. So really this issue of integration and innovation. And I'm going to do it through the lens of a painting that's hanging in my living room. I'll just talk about that, and I'll use that as just a couple of disclosures. And so the actual painting is about that size, actually. It's 3 meters across, or it's a series of 3 panels, about 1.5 meters high. And this is from an artist called Vincent Devine. So Vincent actually painted a triptych portrait of Vicky Phelan, who was, I think, sold on the Late Show a number of years back. And I went to opening of that, kind of showing of that painting in Mooncoin, where Vicky was actually living at the time. And I was struck by how the artist kind of displayed kind of difficult concepts through the kind of visual means. And so I struck up a partnership with Vincent a couple of years back, really to come up with a series of different paintings for different subjects, really developing a visual narrative to explain cancer research. And we developed this piece last year, and this is co-developed with people with lived experience of cancer, people, cancer researchers, and various other individuals, people from the pharma sector, tell the story of the past, present, and the future of cancer research, particularly around Ireland, but not exclusively Ireland. And I'll come back to each panel in a minute. So I'm going to kick off with the first, and in the first panel, what you see is that it's quite dark, because we're talking about the past. We didn't really know about cancer. We didn't know the kind of underpinning biology. People were scared. People didn't talk about cancer, particularly, in older societal contexts. People actually didn't mention the word. And I'm not sure if you can see in the bottom left, there's a velociraptor skull. And the first documented evidence of cancer is in a dinosaur from osteosarcoma that's found in dinosaur bones. And what you see here is a child kind of reaching up for what appears to be a fruit. And we kind of created that to symbolize a child reaching for a potential new treatment, which could be an apple. And what you see in the bottom right is an apple that's kind of on the ground rotting. That's to represent the idea of maybe a failed treatment. Not sure if you can see here on just beside the child's feet, there's a kind of molecular structure. It's like a 6-carbon ring. And that's to represent chemical structure. It's like a new drug. It's like a stepping stone. The child could step on that drug to reach the apple. So that's the idea of early stage drug development. And my favorite piece, which you can't see here, is a werewolf. Because in medieval Irish literature, cancer was also described as a werewolf because you have abnormal cells within your body. In the background, you see kind of a number of different mountains, and I'm going to talk about what influenced those mountains. Just two people, which actually are kind of one person that's reasonably well known, the other person that's not, that had a major impact at the global level. So here is a chap called Dennis Parsons Burkitt. So he was a Trinity graduate. He originally started studying engineering, and then he had kind of, I suppose he had a very strong religious belief. He transitioned from engineering to study medicine. And then he decided to go to Africa to carry out, he was a surgeon, carry out clinical duties, but also to act as a missionary in Africa. But he noticed he found this kind of frequent tumor that was found in various different locations, in commonly children, often in the jaws. And that was characterized as, became known as Burkitt's lymphoma. But what was interesting about this was he performed, since you can see this map of Africa, he essentially did a road trip across Africa with his friends to actually describe the occurrence, the frequency of this jaw-like tumor. And it essentially was where certain areas of Africa which were endemic in terms of malaria. There's an intersection between malaria in terms of modification of the immune response and susceptibility to lymphoma. He also performed some of the first chemotherapy administrations actually in his house. It wasn't in the hospital in Africa. This is an example of a child on the left who had Burkitt's lymphoma, and then post-chemotherapy treatment, you can see reduction. As well as that observation, he also was one of the first people to note a kind of link between the diet and impact on the Western diet in terms of increased incidence of certain types of cancer. And he was probably one of the few people in the 70s who would be sitting, eating his fruit, while the rest were drinking whiskey and smoking their cigars, right? So he was a bit before his time. The other person I want to mention is this chap here, Éanna McCanna. So he's a filmmaker from Belfast who actually last year released a film called Breakout, which tells the story of Dennis Burkitt. And the reason why he did that is because he was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma at 18, came out the other side, and he wanted to understand that. This is a kind of Irish English language film that you can find on TG Car. It's a fantastic film. But the other person that people would be less familiar with is Maya Cole. She was a radiologist from Cavan who actually worked mainly in Manchester, but she actually was one of the key authors of the first administration of what became tamoxifen. essentially the drug that's probably saved more lives than any other cancer drug worldwide. In the early 70s, it was only a modest number of, I think it was about 46 patients. These patients were unselected, and I'll talk about the idea of patient selection later. But actually, this was a key seminal study back in the day. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm on the middle panel. So for me, I'll talk a bit, I won't go through all the details, but you can see here the obvious thing in the middle is the dragon. So why is a dragon there? So the dragon is to represent chemotherapy. There's certain types of chemotherapy. One type that doxorubicin, which is actually red in the bag and very toxic, a lot of side effects, and patients commonly call it the red devil or the red dragon. Oddly enough, kids call it strawberry chemo. Kind of an odd anecdote. And chemotherapy, it's very powerful. You can see that the dragon blowing fire on the right-hand side, which is the iceberg representing the tumor. Chemotherapy is very powerful. Fire will melt the tumor, but what is the indirect effect? It may flood the environment. So chemotherapy, very effective, but can potentially lead to side effects. And I'll come back to the theme, why is this important? It's about dose escalation or more sophisticated administration. I might come back to this later on, but these are kind of different patient stories that we developed into the painting. Early on this year, there was 4 women, Irish women, who actually were kind of noted as part of International Women's Day, were put on stamps for their global contribution to health. One of them is actually a colleague of mine, Professor Janice Walsh from St. Vincent's University Hospital, medical oncologist. As well as kind of leading multiple and kind of participating in multiple practice-changing clinical trials. She was a key person behind essentially the early adoption of the Oncotype DX assay in Ireland. And this is an interesting kind of anecdote because it shows early adoption of a new molecular diagnostic within the Irish healthcare system 4 years before the UK. And it was primarily on the basis of a health economic benefit. That was the main argument that it led to the adoption of this technology. For people who aren't familiar with this, so the idea is that with mammographic screening, you're catching breast cancer much earlier. The key question is, should you treat with chemotherapy or not, as well as hormone therapy? And so this test, which is around 3,000 to 4,000 euro per patient, can actually predict whether someone's going to have maybe a distant recurrence or not. If they have a high risk of distant recurrence, you give chemotherapy, or you recommend. If they don't, you can potentially avoid chemotherapy. And essentially, Ireland participated in some of the big international studies for this assay. Next slide, please. Next animation. Yeah, keep going. Yeah. So it was, as I mentioned, it was the first cost-effectiveness study. It wasn't primarily about its utility in terms of clinical utility. It was around whether it was going to save money to the exchequer. And that actually led to early adoption of this within the public healthcare system in 2011, again, 4 years before the UK. More recent studies have shown that it actually contributes to significant healthcare savings, but also where it can actually have a societal benefit for the patients because over 2/3 of those patients can avoid chemotherapy, all of those toxic effects. This has personal benefits to those individuals because, you know, if they don't take chemotherapy, they can get into the workplace and save money personally. So a lot of benefits. So again, and this is probably a theme that we might come back to in the discussion, when we talk about effectiveness, it's not, obviously does a drug work in terms of eradication of the tumor, is it reduce side effects, but there's other aspects that we need to consider. And I'll finish off on this example, which was a bit more recent. So an alumnus from Smurfit School as well, Professor John Crown, former senator. He had a long-standing collaboration with Professor Dennis Lehman, who was a medical oncologist in California, who there's a made-for-TV film. Harry Connick Jr. played him. He doesn't look like Harry Connick Jr., right? But he, essentially Dennis Lehman, if it wasn't for Dennis Lehman, we wouldn't have precision cancer therapy. Against the tide, at the time Genentech, who did the first trials for Herceptin, they didn't actually want to do those studies. It was essentially bullying and convincing of Dennis Lehman, plus people, essentially patient advocates within Hollywood, essentially that actually drove the initial clinical studies behind Herceptin. We wouldn't have cancer immunotherapy. We wouldn't have precision cancer medicine if it wasn't for Dennis Lehman. Dennis was revolutionized this whole area of HER2 targeted therapy in breast cancer. There's lots of different therapies. For example, there's a huge revolution now in antibody drug conjugates. Big interest in that space. And again, Professor John Crown here in Ireland has led out and contributed massively to those studies. Next slide, please. More recently, there's a very interesting company. I think it's actually apparently the fastest growing company in Europe at the moment, Illuminate. It's a company in Galway, led by a very young chap here, Aaron. And there are two initial products that they developed. And what they do is they focus on patient needs. So a common side effects of chemotherapy is obviously hair loss and neuropathy. So they actually developed two devices, essentially an improved cold cap on the left-hand side and boots to deal with neuropathy during treatment. Again, they're creating med-tech devices addressing key challenges that patients experience during their treatment. Slide. We might come back to this in the panel discussion. So that's great, we've contributed, but there are some challenges. We know, for example, we have this fantastic story in terms of manufacturing. Last year, I think we were Europe's biggest exporter of drugs beyond, I think, Germany, mainly due to the export of anti-obesity drugs, close to 150 billion in terms of pharma exports. But where are we in terms of drug access? There's Germany. Okay. EU approvals, 56, 54 drugs available in Germany. Where's Ireland? 14. Okay. 25% of drugs in the oncology space we have access to. So obviously our patients within Ireland aren't getting access, but also the standard of care is different in Germany versus Ireland, and that has actually knock-on impacts in terms of clinical trials. As well as the actual proportion of drugs which are accessed, there has been a classic problem in terms of delayed access as well, in terms of delayed reimbursement, where it's beyond close to 2 years or around that 2-year point. Whereas in kind of legislation, it has been for the last 10 years around 180. We have not achieved that. There's been some recent progress in that context, and mainly driven both from the pharma arena, but also by patients. Patients being vocal, particularly this lady here, Miriam Staunton. She's a stage 4 melanoma patient who set up this organization last year called UCAN Ireland. Go to the next slide, please. So I call it like the all-star team of patient advocates, where you have the strong patient advocates covering different cancer types across the entire island, where they've actually lobbied and had a very strong impact at a governmental level to push the system. So again, when we're having this conversation, we have the business agenda, but also sometimes in Ireland, you also have to push this button in terms of the patient voice, because to be honest, politicians will listen to a patient voice as opposed to some other lobby group as well. Next slide. So they had a big focus on this issue in terms of drug access, the fact that we don't have in Ireland, compared to some other jurisdictions, an early access program to experimental therapeutics, this huge delay, all of these issues that we talked about, and they focused specifically on that. Next slide. Again, there's been some recent progress due to two main representative groups, the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association, Medicines for Ireland, have co-signed an agreement with the Department of Health and the HSE to look at kind of improving the situation in terms of accelerated access, maybe also around that have improved sustainability and security of supply, which is good, that's progress. But I suppose we'll be looking at this over the next couple of years. Next slide. So I generated this morning at 6 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't find a good slide. So I used ChatGPT, if you don't mind, for this. But it really nicely summarizes this kind of comparison between conventional therapy and precision cancer therapy. The idea of more targeted approaches makes things more efficient. And again, we're talking about costs of drugs. Why do drugs cost so much? 30 to 40% of drugs are actually is around the actual branding, marketing of drugs. If you go to one of our big cancer meetings, ASCO, a stand there costs probably a couple of million for a stand, an actual trade stand, and there's probably several hundred of those in the room. It's crazy, right? 30 to 40% of a drug cost is marketing. Apart from that, after that, there's R&D cost. How can we make it more efficient? The argument is precision cancer therapy. Does the evidence stack up? If you have a precision approach, if you have a biomarker, is your drug development more efficient? Next slide. So this is from a good colleague of mine, ACRI colleague, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And he published a paper fairly recently, and again, these are lists of drugs on the left-hand side and right. On the left, you have a drug which is matched to a precision assay, a companion diagnostic or a biomarker. On the right, it's just like a one-size-fits-all approach. And the main message is, which is I thought was a bit scary. I used to say to people it was 1 to 2 billion to develop a drug. The average cost is 4 billion. That's pretty scary. So if the average cost is 4 billion, obviously to be profitable, you have to make more than that. Also pretty scary, some drugs are 15 billion to actually create. That's pretty scary as well. But the main message is, if you actually have a precision approach, it's 1 billion less, so it's more efficient. The main driver is essentially around clinical trials, that you have more efficient clinical trials and you have a definite return on investment. So it's a no-brainer. You should use a precision approach if you have any idea of having an efficient approach to drug development. Next slide. Thankfully, in Ireland, we're actually home to some of the world leaders in precision oncology. So my good colleague, Professor Walter Kolch, leads a program called Precision Oncology Ireland. I used to be the deputy director of this program. It's now morphed into a new program. And my PhD student, our former one, who's now taken over, Professor Donald Brennan, who's chair of the clinical trials oversight group, he's now assuming my role. But this was essentially a construct where we brought together multiple universities, multiple cancer charities, and industry partners to come up with better solutions in terms of precision oncology. Next slide. This is my passion project. I was going to spend a couple of minutes talking about this, but this is the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute. Again, one of the reasons why I suppose I was frustrated about the fact that we're in a small island. We should be working more efficiently together between institutions. So that's a summary of what we've been trying to do over the last 4 to 5 years. I'll give you some examples of that. The starting point for this, there was a kind of political starting point. When the Good Friday Agreement was signed, a year afterwards, there was essentially an MOU signed between Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and the US National Cancer Institute for cancer as a neutral topic to focus on in terms of bringing people together, north and south, and a segue to the US. And that was very impactful. It had a big impact on our clinical trials ecosystem on the island. If you look at a lot of the oncologists that we have, actually practicing oncologists in Ireland, over 60% of them are trained in 5 centres from the US, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Dana-Farber, Johns Hopkins, the big players, because of that US connection. But that was okay, but we need to kind of upgrade it a bit, and that's where ACRI has come into play. Next slide. And so for about 5 years ago, myself and Mark Lawler and a couple of others, we brought together representative leads in cancer across different academic institutions, but also importantly, cancer charity sector, governmental stakeholders, patient advocates, and other players. Really develop a cross-border research program, reduce fragmentation, build this critical mass in precision cancer medicine. It's a virtual institute, it's not like a bricks and mortar program. A big focus around data. And I'll talk specifically today about this idea of innovation, and this is something that we're focusing on over the next year. Next slide. We have 3 main thematic areas. One, focus on discovery science, training that next generation of cancer researchers, and we've gotten fairly significant funding in that space, intersectorially, but also within institutions. 2 areas which is probably more interest today, which is really how do we fast track innovations? A lot of talk about AI in health, but like, where's a demonstration of this? I'll give you a couple of examples of where I would see some penetration. Can we improve the clinical trials ecosystem, particularly early phase clinical trials? And then we're going to focus a bit around fueling the knowledge economy. Next slide. So as I mentioned, a big context here was to kind of, I suppose, gain political support underpinning our ideas. We knew that we had the academics, we had the clinicians, we had some industry partners and patients, but we needed to get governmental backup. And we've met with various different groups within both North and South, but particularly supportive has been the Joint Committee for Implementation of Good Friday Agreement. We've met 3 times, and that has been very powerful to get strong cross-party support for our initiative. Next slide. We were very fortunate in terms of the first round of funding under the Shared Island Unit for Research. We bidded strategically for funding under that for cancer programs. We got over 1/3 of the funding for cancer programs North and South. 3 which were, one I coordinate with Mark Lawler, which is like a demonstrator for training of people North and South. We trained 10 PhD students, 10 postdocs in precision cancer medicine. And then we have a program focused on liquid biopsy led by Lorraine O'Driscoll in Trinity and Paul Mullen in Queen's, and the area of digital health led by Aidan Culhan in Limerick and Mark Lawler in Queen's. So these are demonstrators for collaboration. Next slide. The other thing we're quite proud of is we do a lot of engagement at an international level. So I call this the Davos of cancer, right, which is a weird tagline. But essentially we brought together the 100 world leaders from Europe and the US, essentially the president of ASCO, the chief medical officer of ASCO, the leads from the National Cancer Institute and European equivalents, essentially to Farmley for 2 days where we looked at the topic of cancer knows no borders. Why Ireland? Well, in 2024, it was the 20-year anniversary of the introduction of the ban on smoking in the workplace. Ireland was the first country in the world to do this. It was actually a difficult thing to do back then. It took someone to do it, and then there was follow through. So we can lead when prevalent. Next slide. We also were one of the first groups to actually present in the US in the Cancer Caucus. We had a specific, we were asked to present in Congress on what we were doing in terms of that partnership approach. Because again, in a post-conflict kind of aspect, can we collaborate together? And this is very topical, obviously, at the moment in terms of what's going on in Ukraine and other jurisdictions. Next slide. So I was going to talk now just specifically about innovation. And we had done a lot of engagement with academic institutions and clinical institutions, but we knew that there was a very exciting story that was taking place in terms of oncology innovation on the island. We know about the big manufacturing successes that are there, obviously some clinical trial activity, but also we had this burgeoning collection of companies that were kind of sprouting out in terms of oncology therapeutics, diagnostics, and, if you go back, sorry, or allied digital health. And the idea is we wanted to quantify that. So we got funding from Intertrade Ireland, essentially to quantify what that looked like. So this is a report we launched last year, next slide, which essentially summarised what it looked like, what was the landscape. It was over 170 companies which had an oncology interest, both small to large. And from that, a recommendation was to establish an all-island oncology cluster where we bring together the strengths of people. It's an industry-driven cluster, which we're essentially embarking upon, to really consolidate those strengths, connect the infrastructure north and south. And I'll talk about one example of an infrastructure which I'm involved with called the RCUB, address critical gaps in terms of clinical infrastructure. We have an outstanding issue around, I don't know if we're talking about digital health, and then partnership. And so this was co-launched by the 2 ministers of the economy, North and South, 2 years ago. Next slide. I won't go into detail. So what's happening now is, following on from that report, we've got funding from a 6-year program from Intertrade Ireland to establish this cluster. Next Monday, we're actually having a consultative forum with industry leaders from across the island, from that sector, to define what that cluster looks like in terms of the shape of that cluster. It's going to be an industry-driven cluster. Next slide. And again, we believe that this cluster will be beneficial to not only help business, but obviously will have broader societal and health benefits in terms of that better connectivity. Next slide. So, yeah, I don't know if I have time to go through this, but the reason why I have the tree here, the tree in the broader picture, is actually our reference to ACRI. So we had this kind of broader tree, okay? Next slide. So this is the future. So what do we notice about the future? It's a bit brighter, but it's less clear. Okay, so this is a bit more projecting out into the future. Can't really see it that clearly from the image, but you see the legs here facing off. Within those legs, you've got kind of veins and arteries drawn within the legs. And one of my colleagues, Fiona Freeman, she actually focuses on developing essentially artificial chip models for the vasculature. So it was a reference to that. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly highlight some future elements. Next slide, or next, yeah. I'm just going to give very quickly just 2 technological advances in the interest of time. One, which I work specifically in the area of digital pathology, and one with my colleague in the area of digital twins. Just examples, you can pick anything, right? But at least we're competing against the AI session here, so we have a bit of AI in here. So next slide. Again, another slide I did this morning. And this is the idea of when you get a tumor removed, obviously it's a very thin slice is made of that tumor. It's put on a slide, and a pathologist looks down a microscope. We can digitize that slide, and with digitization, you can use artificial intelligence technologies to analyze that. And there's a whole revolution in the last 5 to 10 years now in this whole area of digital pathology to actually develop automated solutions. And I just looked at recently, the HSE apparently has approved something like 45 million to completely digitize the system in Ireland, which is great. Next slide. Just recently, I think last week, Roche bought Path AI as an example for €1 billion. I don't know how many people are in the company. There's probably about 50 or 60 people in the company, specifically on this whole area of technology, that they feel that this AI-based approach in terms of not just antibody-based diagnostics or sequencing, just purely the use of an image can be a diagnostic. Next slide. This is the area of digital twins. So this is my colleague Walter Koch. This is his area of expertise. So his concept is, if you have enough information on a previous individual, you can use that to infer the subsequent individual. And so this is the whole area of in silico clinical trials, predicting events and predicting activities. And I'll give you a good example here. So this is from another painting that Vincent drew, and this is probably the most difficult painting that he ever created, because it was essentially it was influenced by a child who actually unfortunately passed away. And I introduced Vincent to the father of that child. Her name was Cleena, and she was diagnosed with essentially a neuroblastoma from 4 years, and she died just before her 10th birthday. And it was kind of difficult for me to introduce him, and I said, look, once I did it, the parents were delighted to talk about the experience. And essentially it's represented here. So it's not exactly Cleena, but it's a representation of a child that has gone through very aggressive treatment, lots of interventions on the child. And what you see here is a table. And there are 2 parts which I find amazing. See this red element here? That's a strawberry, for strawberry chemo, if you remember back to the reference. But also the ragdoll, because when children go through aggressive chemotherapy when they're young, it can actually often leave them infertile. If they survive their cancer experience, it can leave them infertile. So it's a reference to that. But in the reference to digital twin is, you see here on the left, you've got a child that seems to be in kind of medical garb, maybe going to an operation. It's handing over something to the other child. But this could be my chart. Give me the information. This is the idea that, unfortunately, in the case of Cleena, who passed away from her disease, can we learn from those experiences to help the new child that's coming through? I'm going to leave it off that part. And I'm just going to finish off, and this is probably just to fuel the subsequent discussion, just a couple of topics where things are. And these are just a couple of things that struck me that might be useful to think about. Clinical trials. John Crown, who I mentioned, had a big impact. He was one of the co-founders of a precursor to Cancer Trials Ireland called ICORG, which had a big impact on clinical trials. At one stage, we had 40% of cancer patients in Ireland participating in clinical trials. 40%. Currently, we have less than 3% of cancer patients participating in clinical trials. Our target by the National Cancer Control Programme is 6%. The benchmark for what's called comprehensive cancer centre status internationally is 10%. So we're quite far behind. Why is that the case? Because it's become very bureaucratic to do clinical trials in Ireland. There's been some recent kind of changes there. Obviously, the other challenge that we have is that we don't have electronic patient record. So there's a lot of talk about AI, but like, okay, forget about AI if you can't actually have a digital record, okay? So there again, recent progress there, but will take some time for that to come into pass. On the positive side, we at last may have a national life sciences strategy. So we had this enormous manufacturing success, but that was without an actual bespoke strategy, right? With a strategy, maybe we can actually do better. And then I'll just finish off on an accelerator hubs. So again, this is my former PhD student who's taken over from me from this program, Donald Brennan, but he chaired with this National Clinical Trials Oversight Group. I won't go through the recommendations because I think we're going to cover it later, but it's just to simplify the process and improve the clinical trials ecosystem. And hopefully this will happen over the next couple of years. It's not cancer specific, but it's a broader development in clinical trials. Next slide. Data, again, Mark Lawler is very keen on the data space. He launched a report there recently on how we can actually improve things. He does a lot of work in the UK as part of DataCan UK. For example, the early data with COVID, in terms of the impact of COVID, negative impact of COVID on cancer, that came from his work because he had access, real-time access to healthcare data in the UK. We don't have that in Ireland. So the whole idea is we can't actually improve our system if we don't have the data. So came up with some recommendations there. Next slide. So again, there's been a lot of focus on the National Life Sciences Strategy, lots of events. I participated in one last year that was organised by Roche. There's been lots of different discussions around the National Life Sciences Strategy, lots of different forums. There is an EU Life Sciences Strategy. We have this pivotal moment that we're assuming the EU presidency in July this year. We're going to be probably managing the Biotech Act, which is about simplification of rules around the biotech. My personal bias is it's been great that we have had this manufacturing success, but we need a more diversified ecosystem. When the tariff question came out, right, everybody was worried. We can't stop being worried about that because there's other pressures out there apart from in the US. So we need a more resilient and diversified ecosystem. I think we need a stronger Indigenous sector. Next slide. And I'll just finish off on this. In our efforts, so one of the things that always frustrated me as an academic was a lot of good ideas just didn't go anywhere. And what's happened recently is the Research Ireland, through funding from the European Regional Development Fund, have actually funded 3 new big programs, accelerators, one in ICT, one in health tech, and one in therapeutics. I co-lead the one in therapeutics. And this is a joint initiative with Trinity, UCD, and RCSI, where essentially we're funding that transition from once you've developed a novel therapeutic molecule, can we bring it, make it commercial? Okay, bring it to commercial reality? And so we've just been funded there just recently last year to push that forward. Next slide. And what it's really is funding projects of all sizes and shape. We have a very sophisticated advisory group of VC, international, local VC, and industrial experts which are advising the projects. And then the whole idea is hopefully this will lead to further kind of Indigenous spin-outs in the therapeutic space. And I'll just finish off on this video here. This is a 1-minute video which summarises the ARC-Hub.
There's always been a massive gap, actually, between academic research and getting it to commercialised and getting into industry.
The ARC-Hub for Therapeutics really is the first time where we've come together across multiple different institutions, really to harness all of the talent that we have.
We aim to accelerate the journey from lab to patient and drive better outcomes for Ireland's health and economy.
What ARC will bring for our research community is the support of meeting the right people at the right time in the project.
And to really identify the value in what they are doing.
And to ensure that their projects are really set up from the very beginning for success.
It allows a whole new generation of researchers to have that entrepreneurial training and drive.
We have fantastic science, we have fantastic researchers, we have terrific entrepreneurs, we've got a vibrant venture capital community. So all the pieces are in place.
So that we can see and believe in ourselves as drug developers and not just manufacturers.
Okay. And I just want to finish off by thanking Vincent, who actually created that painting that's sitting in my living room and scares my cleaner when she first saw it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Liam. And all I can say is, wow, the work that you are doing is absolutely incredible, not only from a scientific perspective, but also what you're doing in terms of trying to commercialize that, to bring that to improve the lives of people. So lots of food for thought. I think lots of information there and lots of data to absorb. So at this stage, I'd love it to open to the floor for comments, questions, feedback for Liam. We have somebody here. Yeah. Pauline, can I take one? Yeah, I can take one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for a brilliant presentation. I want to ask a question about, you mentioned that Ireland has one of the lowest number of drugs actually available in cancer. So for a long time, the drug approval, EMA approval, hasn't been the hurdle. It's been the HEOR angle of, NICE. I just wondered, while the emotive aspect of getting new drugs available, for, particularly for children, it's huge. Anyone who has a particular cancer or a family member, there's no end to what you would do. But how does it actually work out financially if a healthcare system has to decide between, funding 2 patients with a really rare type of cancer compared to what you could do for preventive cancer or preventive cardiovascular medicine? Do the numbers stack up?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I think the problem is that, again, as I mentioned, what's going to happen is you're already is a 2-tier system. You've got access within the public, generally the private healthcare system, and some of the insurers have actually already stepped in and are providing access upon EMA approval. Was one main insurer, then others kind of tend to adopt that. So there's already kind of upfront inequity in the system, already pre-existing. Also, people need to have a broader discussion about just the cost of drugs versus the cost of lost productivity. It's not just the cost of the drug. There's the broad knock-on impact of the effect on the individual and their family, which often is not considered in the cost-effectiveness analysis, but should be taken into consideration in terms of productivity. As I mentioned, there's as a case example given. But I think the problem is that the other jurisdictions, right? I would think we would consider ourselves relatively close to Germany. We're nowhere near that. How come the Germans can do it, we can't? Simple as that.
Right, just add to that, there was on TV during the there was a comment made by, I think somebody from HSE, who said that it wasn't really a matter of money here, but that a lot of the manufacturers of the drugs just weren't interested in Ireland, given that it was such a small market. And that was the reason why, say, 14 drugs are licensed in Ireland.
Yeah,
is there truth in that?
Well, again, I think we might get our industry colleagues to talk about that, but that's often, I think it was Michael Barry often puts that out there, that manufacturers don't come and actually submit their dossiers because we're not a market. And we also have to ask the question is why it's not considered an attractive market. If it's a bank door and if it's like that situation and it's difficult, we make it difficult. So I don't know the ins and outs, but I don't think it's down to that. People have looked at it kind of probably just part of it there, but it's not the sole reason. And again, this recent agreement have talked about simplifying the process. So there is kind of probably blame on two sides here.
I'd happily contribute to that conversation. Rare Diseases Ireland work quite closely with Miriam around the access to medicines, generally speaking, and orphan medicines in particular. And I guess the discussion, primetime discussion last Thursday around access to medicines and the interaction, the dynamic between industry and the state, it's a bit misleading. What we do know from the weight reports that come out on an annual basis in Europe is that Ireland is lagging far behind every year. And we're lagging behind our peers as well, not just Germany, which is obviously a massive market, and that's the argument that we always hear, Ireland's a small market, therefore we don't, we're lagging behind Scotland, we're lagging behind Finland massively. They're two plus times ahead of us in terms of access to medicines. And I think that this, really plays into the idea of, I've sat on the clinical trials oversight group. You can't bring clinical trials if you're on a, 15-year-old tech. What's the point in investing in that area if we're administering tech that's, 10 or 15 years old? Likewise, I would say that. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But it's a really passionate thing, and it absorbs so much bandwidth. Sorry, the life sciences strategy, it needs to come together. It should be part of it. I missed the meeting recently on it, but it all needs to tie together. We can't just say, industry bad, state good, saving money.
I think that's
saving money. We have to look at the full thing, and the fact that industry aren't necessarily making applications in Ireland. It's not a market size thing. I think it's a hostile environment, and that's why they don't. There's I think about 150 orphan medicines available in Europe. About 110 of them are with companies that make one, maybe two products. Why would you spend your time in Ireland if you're going to be spinning your wheels for years and years? You go somewhere easier.
Yeah, it's interesting. Miriam called it the new famine. Think about what happened in the famine, or reputedly that food was being exported, drugs are being exported, and we don't have access. So it's as simple as that. To a person on the street, that's the simple kind of sum game here. You have more experience.
Yeah, I can hop in there with regards to that last question. Sinead Bailey recently departed Bristol Myers Squibb. I was their strategy and operations director and country lead for a period of time as well. So I guess it's been my bread and butter and bane of my life, access to medicines over the last decade in Ireland. So with regards to the question of, are people just not going to bother, the Bristol Myers Squibbs or Pfizers of this world just not going to bother because Ireland is small? I think the fact of the matter is no. At the end of the day, companies are running out of strategic patients. For example, I was recently working on cardiology medicine, amazing medicine for obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We'll call it OHCM. All of my other peers across Europe have launched in their European countries. And then my boss over in the UK was there saying, Sinead, what's going on? Can you not just influence to get it through faster? And at the end of the day, this isn't going to be a big blockbuster drug, but it's significant in terms of the patient benefit. But quite simply, we've been waiting 3 years. We have gotten conditional reimbursement, and what's happening now in Ireland is you have your conditional reimbursement, and then it's like, oh, we need to have a managed access protocol on top of that, and absolutely you need that for more complicated, more expensive drugs. But then the challenge is that's adding further to the timeline. We don't want it for Irish patients. I've a vested interest in providing Irish patients with access to innovative medicines, but it's just a bugbear of pharma at the moment. And there was a question there about, it is a challenge if you have a rare disease that, there's 5 people in Ireland with this really rare genetic disease. It is, Professor Michael Barry that's been referenced, it is a challenge to go, right, do we reimburse and take up a huge chunk of the health budget for that, or do we, use that money that might impact 100,000 patients versus 5, because sometimes it is that magnitude. So I could go on, but it's, I think.
But also there needs to be a broader kind of discussion of the ecosystem, right? So on one hand, we're making money, right, from manufacturing drugs, which goes into the exchequer. On the other hand, we're talking about how much it costs to treat people. Right? You're having these conversations, which I'm sure is repeated multiple times, with local, versions of pharma in Ireland, having multiple conversations in the US or externally saying, oh, you're manufacturing a drug, but you don't have access to a drug. Yep. Right? Do you not think that's going to have an impact on the economics of actually manufacturing in the long run here? It's obviously going to have. So people need to think more broadly about what's going on here, and not just think, oh, this is the cost of the drug. Within the direct healthcare system, not the person, not their broader family, the economic impact of not actually delivering and showing follow through. We don't even have an early access program, right? Like that's, I think, what Miriam and her colleagues were asking for. Just give us an early access program. Most other countries have early access programs in place, you know.
And it's back to the bureaucracy. So what I was working on was an early access program for this cardiology drug, but just the hoops and loops that you have to jump through to get it onto the market from a patient safety perspective, it's phenomenal. So I think Bristol Myers Squibb are nearly there with it. And the idea is you have early access, but if there was a policy in place where there was, you know, a simple, straightforward system to have that early access program, you know, it's taken us nearly a year to get all the hoops and loops and governance around it. And actually using digital twins, we worked with EY, you know, mapping the patient pathway, you know, to try and pitch for more funding, et cetera, for it. So we're trying our best, but it's a very tricky ecosystem in Ireland.
But I think that's
back to policy.
Yeah, but that's why life science strategy is important, because
100%.
the thing about, well, it's driven by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, but they have brought in the Department of Health as well. So it's not like out there on their own.
Yep.
Because some of the more successful life science strategies are interdepartmental. It's not just one or the other. It has to be a cross-departmental approach, because there's kind of connectivity between that. Again, it's in the area of digital health. Like, there's a big discussion around the absence of electronic healthcare record, and again, the same issue is there. We have so many different IT companies here, and a big discussion around AI, but we can't use it. There's definite health economic savings to using of this technology, but if you don't have the data, you can't actually do it.
I think that's a wonderful segue to our discussion panel. So I think many of our panel members will have lots of reactions to your presentation as well, Liam. So if I could invite our panel members to join us, and while they are, I will introduce everybody. And Oliver. So lots of food for thought in terms of some of the things that Liam touched upon. So to introduce you to our panel, we have, first of all, Sinead. Sinead Bailey is most recently served more than 12 years as strategy and operations lead for Irish Bristol Myers Squibb commercial affiliate, one of the world's leading global pharmaceutical companies. And in that context, I think you have an incredible amount of experience in terms of what Liam was alluding to in terms of the cost of drugs, in terms of marketing. So perhaps you can speak to that. In terms of the areas that the drugs that you've worked upon, they specialise in cardiology, as you mentioned, also oncology, hematology, immunology, among other therapeutic areas. Sinead's experience lies primarily in strategic marketing and sales leadership. And she's worked in a number of multinational companies spanning FMCG, consumer healthcare, as well as ethical pharmaceuticals. Her primary degree is in industrial biochemistry, and she also holds qualifications in marketing, health economics, corporate governance, as well as, of course, being an alum of our Executive MBA program here in the UCD Smurfit School. Sinead is passionate about building brands which drive positive health outcomes for people and helping patients to prevail over serious diseases. Some of the examples that Liam has given us. Patrick is next up. Patrick is a senior healthcare professional experienced in leading large multidisciplinary teams with expertise leading and executing healthcare projects in dynamic and challenging environments. Patrick is co-founder of Kaizen Pharma Consulting and is part of the health and social care team at Deloitte Ireland. Previously, Patrick spent more than 15 years working as a pharmacist before pursuing, again, our Executive MBA program here at the Smurfit School. Primary degree, like myself, in pharmacology, a Bachelor of Science here at UCD. And Kieran Murray is Chief Chairperson of Icon PLC and previously served both in the role as CEO and also CFO. And I think you've been with Icon since 2005, Kieran. So Kieran has incredible depth and breadth of experience, more than 35 years of leadership, forged from a career spent operating in global markets in high-growth entrepreneurial companies with blue-chip multinational companies, including PwC, also Kraft Foods, Novell Inc., Northern Foods, and Codex Systems. Not only that, but Kieran has also played a leadership role in advocating for safe, ethical, high-quality research through his 2014 chairmanship of the Association of Clinical Research Organisations, or ACRO. And ACRO represents clinical research industry globally to key stakeholders, including the pharmaceutical sector, biotech, medical device companies, regulators, legislators, and patient groups, so lots of stakeholders. Kieran graduated with the BCom. Again, an alum of UCD, is Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Ireland, and also has an honorary degree, Doctor of Law from UCD, for his support of third-level research and innovation in Ireland. So thank you, Kieran, for joining us. Kieran is also a member of our advisory board here in the UCD Smurfit School. And last but not least, turning to Oliver on my right, Oliver serves as Chair of Level Health and Chairman of our UCD Foundation. Level Health is proud to be rewriting the rules of health insurance in Ireland. Oliver is founder of two health insurers now merged to form what we know as Irish Life Health. He is also co-founder of the Regulatory Capital, a provider of capital to insurers. Also Dayon, biometric identity provider, and also One Big Switch, a consumer switching platform. Previously, Oliver served as CEO of VHI and also CEO of An Bord Tráchtála, the state agency for SMEs. Oliver is also chair of Fidata, which is a European leader in insurance platform as a service, and has chaired several government-funded research centres and task force. Not an MBA alum of UCD, but of INSEAD in Paris, in France, but also an alum of UCD in terms of Bachelor of Engineering in Chemical Engineering. So we really have a multidisciplinary team and panel here this afternoon with a wealth and breadth of experience to draw upon and have a fantastic conversation. So, Liam, I think you've really kicked off the conversation really well, and you've given us lots of food for thought in terms of so many areas, beginning with your own fantastic work. And I suppose also in terms of setting the scene, it's important to highlight that compared to any other sector in our economy, healthcare is the most complex sector in the economy. It brings together human biology, where Liam is an expert. Also, that brings in the uniqueness of every single person, technology, as we talk about, information systems, regulation, politics, geopolitics indeed, and of course, all in the context of limited resources. We have multiple actors within our healthcare systems, some with conflicting interests, as we seek to provide and to seek optimise health outcomes for our patients, and to optimise the use of the scarce resources that we have to spend, to which you alluded to in your question. Complexity theory, or the science of complexity, has often been drawn upon in an attempt to disentangle some of these complexities in terms of optimising clinical workflows, optimising quality and safety of care, equity of access to care, whilst also managing the costs of all stakeholders involved. Cost of patients, and also, Liam, you talked about not only the economic cost, but the cost of the patient-borne experience and the family and the extended family and caregivers. Also, obviously, providers of care and payers, such as yourself, Oliver, in the insurance area. So I think we can all agree we are operating in a very complex environment with so many stakeholders and so much at stake in terms of life and death, because that is really what we're talking about here, isn't it? So on that note, I'm going to turn to our panel, and immediately to my right, Oliver, I might ask you to begin with maybe sharing with us what you see as our top three, or what are our key global challenges that we have at the moment.
Great. Well, do you know what I might do, Gerardine, is give you a little bit of a perspective, just by way of introduction, on how payers kind of see the world. So Liam put up, better driving better patient outcomes. So better patient outcomes work in general for a public payer, because if you get better patient outcome, that patient returns to work, let's say, and is a taxpayer. But that dynamic doesn't always work for us private payers. You know, we're in the business, we're businesses. We're in the business, like many of you are if you're in business, of the next quarter and what are our results going to be like. So better patient outcomes doesn't always kind of match what we're trying to achieve. But when we always get healthcare providers pitching to us, you know, now maybe not so much on the oncology drug side, but certainly all types of providers, healthcare services, new treatments, new facilities, new clinics, you know, whatever. And the pitches that we get always start with better patient outcomes. But like, again, you know, so we always start by saying, well, we're not always in the same, we're not always aligned on that, we're not always thinking about better patient outcomes. I mean, look, take for example, one of the drugs that Liam was talking about. You know, if we cover, let's say there's a whole bunch of public and private payers in the market, and we're the first, our insurer is the first to cover a new drug. So we're going to get better patient outcomes. But what's the problem for us is, first of all, we're going to have higher claims because now we're covering something that the other guys aren't. But it's worse. We're going to have a selection effect. So people are going to join us to access the drug. So we're going to attract all these sick people. So unless, you know, we all kind of jump together, we can't do it. Now, we do like all jumping together, because if we all go together, you know, okay, our costs, our claims base increase by a certain amount. Hey, but happy days, we just pass it on to our customers, you know, all of you as consumers who are buying your health insurance. So that also works, but the problem is the timing. We've got to go together. But just one thing I would say on pitching to private sector payers, there are two things that kind of work for us. One is, can you reduce our costs? So is the treatment that you're proposing for us to cover, is it going to reduce our cost? So do we have people that we're covering now and they're in an expensive care setting, and afterwards those same people can get covered by your treatment, which is going to be less expensive? So that's a health actuarial pitch. And most providers don't come in with their numbers done, so they can't articulate that kind of pitch and show how it will come out kind of cheaper. And the second aspect is, of course, can we, as the health insurer, sell more health insurance if we include? Now that means you're at the very consumer end. So again, you know, oncology drugs don't sell to kind of consumers. You know, we can't put that into our pitch. We can't say, buy our health insurance because it covers that drug. People just aren't interested. They're interested in maternity. They're interested in the primary care end of things. They're interested in wellness. You know, sometimes you can get like longevity kind of pitches in there. That's the kind of stuff they're interested in. So if your product or your service fits anywhere in there, you know, then you can present it as, you know what, if you include this in your health insurance plan, you can get more customers. So that's that. I'll just, you know, I know a lot of you are in the space, so I'll just give you that little bit of input as to how payers kind of see the world. A couple of other things then, and so Gerardine, you asked about kind of some of the big kind of geopolitical things. One of the big areas of interest to everybody, you know, nowadays, and I'm sure all of you here in this room have an AI plan. You know, we're all working on AI. It's, you know, everybody's kind of learning about it now. Our view in the payer world is, and like, look, we're already getting agentic AIs coming to us, like writing to us on behalf of a consumer saying, quote me for this, I want insurance that does this, this, and this. And we're getting our agents to reply to those agents, right? I mean, you know, this is not kind of like 5 years away. Like, this is actually happening now. So like AI, and my own view on this is AI is going to transform our world, the world of healthcare, more than it is any other sector of our economy. Some of you might remember Jim Clark when he set up Healthion back in the first internet bubble. And Jim raised 400 million at the time on a triangle which had patients, payers, and providers on it. And he said, I'm going to build a platform that's going to move money and information around between all the participants in this industry. And after spending the 400 million that he raised, he went bust. So, and everybody, look, Oscar, I was with Penang in China last week. Everybody is trying to do this. But ultimately, the nirvana for the the insurance world is like to be able to move all that information and stuff around. And AI, I think, is going to be huge because we're all living in a rules-based system, whether it's the human biology or whether it's the rules of your policy. It's a rules-based system. And I think AI is going to be massively transformational for the industry on a 10-year horizon. I spent a bit of time in China last month, and I met Penang there, who are probably the fourth, and actually, by the way, they're the fourth health insurance company in the world. The largest health insurance company in the world is United Health. So health insurance is such a huge space. But Penang, one of their initiatives that they want to do now is they want to own the interaction with their customers, the health interaction. So like they want to become the health managers. This is again another nirvana for us payers. We see how fragmented the health insurance space is. Everybody who's a healthcare provider has a little bit of information on that illness or that treatment or when you interacted with that patient. But none of us have all the information, but we do. Like we insure people sometimes throughout their whole lives or for many decades. So what Penang are trying to do is they're saying, we actually want to help manage people's lives. So we want to say, you are now a 60-year-old male, you should be doing this, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. What's your background, what's your family history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and like manage you through your whole interaction with the healthcare kind of space. And that, again, is one of these nirvanas that has never been actioned, but I think AI is slowly going to get us there. Mm-hmm. And one last point.
The data. You have the data.
We have the data. I mean, at least collectively, the industry does have the data.
Yeah.
One very last point is just around GDP and medical inflation. So medical inflation, as we all know, runs about 8 to 12%. GDP, if we're doing well, like we are, 3 to 4%. In the long run, it is impossible that any country kind of keeps up its public health offering unless it's growing at 8 to 12%. Now, we actually have, for the last 20 years, if you look at the HSE I'm going to say about 30 years ago, in the mid-90s, the HSE was about 4 billion and the private health insurance space was about 400 million. Those two numbers have both multiplied by 10 now. So like you're 30 billion and the private health insurance space is 4 billion going on 5 billion. So we have actually inflated with medical inflation, but that is not sustainable forever. And again, when I was in China, if any of you are interested in some good policy reading, read the Chinese 15-year or the 5-year plan. It's the 15th 5-year plan. And a big part of that now is shifting from the social security system, the public system, slowly, over time, shifting more and more into private because they know that they can't keep up, even with their levels of growth. At the moment in China, about 20% of the population have some kind of private health insurance, but only about 10% of the cost, because health insurance doesn't cover anything. It doesn't cover everything, I should say. But they've seen this, and they want to push their kind of populace into slowly, with time, taking more responsibility and paying more out of pocket privately for their health insurance. This is a direction of travel. Unfortunately, it's something that we have not recognized in Ireland here. Our Department of Health is really the Department of Public Health. There is no policy whatsoever for private healthcare, either for private hospitals or for private health insurers. So we have not kind of had that wake-up kind of moment yet that the Chinese very clearly have about what's the direction of travel. Over time, we're going to have to shift more into private. And that's just because medical inflation is 8 to 12%. And why is medical inflation 8 to 12%? Because of all the new technologies that we're all collectively paying for. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, you've touched on lots of things that I think we will return to, certainly in terms of paying. And I suppose one question that I have, building upon one of the points that Liam mentioned in his presentation was, and the ChatGPT slide that was created this morning at 6 a.m. was the cost benefit of the precision oncology treatments that you spoke about, Liam. So as a payer, if they give a quicker return on investment. They get the patient and the person back to work, being productive, in society again. As a payer, Oliver, surely that is something that you are interested in.
If you're a public payer, yes, because you're a recipient of, you receive the tax. But for us, as a private payer, that doesn't always match, and. Also there's these things about long term, like you say, well, look, in the long run, in a 20-year horizon, or preventative medicines, say, when the long run is a better outcome, but also in the long run, we may not have you as a customer. You might switch to another insurer. So it's very hard for us to be motivated by the long term. We're kind of motivated by the short term. And that's just the way the system is structured. This is normal. Every player in this industry has incentives.
And herein, I suppose, is the misalignment of different actors within our sector, which is a problem. And I know we have Eamon Fitzgerald in the audience, who's been in the private sector for quite some time. So when we have our Q&A later, Eamon, I might invite you to respond to what Oliver has said. So I might turn, Sinead, to you in terms of your experience in the pharmaceutical sector, in terms of sales and marketing. And what are the trends that you've been seeing in terms of global trends and the global challenges for the pharmaceutical sector?
Thanks for that. I think one key global challenge for us right now, if I look across, say, take Bristol Myers Squibb as my most recent experience, is health system readiness. So the medicines we're bringing to market now are far more complex than the medicines we would have brought in the past. So in the past, we were quite big in cardiology and statins. So you take your statin, there's no test to be done in advance. But now we're bringing medicines to market where you might need a genetic test first to see are you going to metabolize this drug quickly, slowly. You might need, say, again, drawing my cardiology experience, a series of echo or echocardiograms over the first, say, 3 to 6 months of the medicine. So quite simply, in different systems, and predominantly in Ireland at the moment from a European perspective, we're just not system ready, and that presents pharma companies like ours with a huge challenge. Liam touched on, the cost of developing medicines. So there's huge risk, huge cost. And then at the other end, just increasingly the medicines are becoming more complex. And then we're finding from a price perspective, they are more expensive to develop. The cost point is going to be higher. But in markets like the States now, net prices of medicines aren't publicly known. So you'll have your list price and your net price. So increasingly, pharma companies are having to give away bigger and deeper discounts. So in terms of profitability in the long run, it's kind of eroding that profitability versus even medicines that we brought to market 10 years ago. So that's a huge issue for us. It's taking longer to get through the regulators, and absolutely we need our medicines to be safe and compliant, but again, just longer to get through regulatory hurdles, FDA, EMA. And then quite simply as well, I think just to bring it back to the patient as opposed to, I'm now no longer working with Bristol Myers Squibb, but just a global challenges with all the sophistication of AI and digital. We're just simply getting sicker as a global population, and that to me is quite depressing. I did some recent research into the GLP-1 market, and obviously Lilly has been mentioned earlier, huge exporter of anti-obesity medication, and I'm not sure are they going to be producing Foundayo. If you don't know the word, you'll soon know the word. Foundayo is oral Mounjaro. But quite simply, I think it's health, it's lifestyle, it's diet. You are what you eat. So I guess the global trend of ultra-processed foods, we're all hearing about it now. We just seem to be getting sicker as a population, not just in Ireland, but globally. So I think that's a huge, policy challenge for us in terms of how we develop better policy to, educate people to educate themselves in terms of health prevention. So, I think a huge growing challenge. You just have to go around and visually look around the place in terms of the percentage of the population that's overweight or obese. I was involved in switching Orlistat, which was an anti-obesity medication about 10 years ago, from prescription only to over-the-counter in pharmacy land. And it's amazing the insights that I would have garnered back then in terms of people wanting that quick fix and not having to work hard at their health. That hasn't really changed, and that's why you're seeing such an uptick in the Mounjaros, because they're definitely working, the Ozempics of this world. I think people on average aren't willing to put in the health work and the health prevention work alongside the medicine. A small percentage of the population are, but I would argue that a much larger percent aren't. So a lot of local and global health challenges for patients and for people. They're people at the end of the day.
And it was interesting, in one of Liam's slides, you showed Dr. Breakout talking about in terms of anti-cancer and preventative for cancer. And one of the questions was, have you eaten your fibre? And you talked about him having his fruit salad when everybody else was having. So that concept that food is medicine and food is nutrition really just hasn't, I suppose, reached our population. And that comes down to education, doesn't it? It comes down to education at the earliest level in schools and health literacy in that context. And in terms of the example that you gave of how, that statin was initially on prescription, then over the counter, looking to the future in terms of the overweight or obesity, or I heard recently them being described, no, we shouldn't be describing them as obesity drugs, but more this health gain medications and drugs. In terms of access, and it comes back to some of the points that Lee mentioned as well, what's your sense of where that might go in the future? Because access is currently an issue at the moment, and perhaps it's an issue for people who most need it rather than the wealthy overweight.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just chatting to people who work for Eli Lilly, this is very much on their mind in terms of ultimately how we make these medicines more accessible. Just interesting case in point, and I had no idea until I went to research it recently. People on average in Ireland, if they're sourcing their anti-obesity medications in Ireland and not online, so that's a whole other story, they're paying an average of about €600 per month for their anti-obesity medication. Some people are actually getting the train up to Belfast because they can get it slightly cheaper up in Belfast. So it's astounding, but I guess not everyone is going to have, €400 to €600 a month. So I believe pharmacists in Ireland are very much an untapped, profession, and Patrick can maybe speak to this more, that ultimately, when these medicines become more established and they're not without their side effects clearly, is that could you see, on a pharmacy prescribing list that pharmacists could ultimately dispense these and they're available over the counter upon consultation with your pharmacist, because at the end of the day, Professor Michael Barry, there's no way he is going to reimburse the likes of the new Fondeo coming through or Mounjaro, because it would just totally blow the health budget locally. But ultimately, again, it's down to policy and thinking outside the box, that ultimately I think it could move that way, because there's no sign of the obesity epidemic disappearing anytime soon. So I think it's going to be, shifting right out of the hospitals into the primary care community, and ultimately maybe into the pharmacy community and to pharmacists. So I don't know if you've anything to add there, Pat.
I think it's very much falling into that bracket of health promotion in terms of, so that I suppose the Department of Health and HSE sort of utilising pharmacists as that sort of very much an untapped resource. They would be, very much an accessible healthcare professional within the system. And it is really that sort of holistic approach to healthcare, and in terms of, like, a very simple example would be smoking cessation within a pharmacy setting, and it's very much applying the same sort of logic, the same sort of training, the same sort of framework to sort of health promotion and sort of, I suppose, weight management and sort of looking after that. I mean, the pharmacists now currently are able to prescribe certain medicines over the counter under the Common Conditions Service, which I think was something the pharmacy profession was pushing for quite a long time, because again, the pharmacists would feel very much like they have a lot more to give than just dispensing prescriptions. And I think that's a big step. And I think, I suppose, the Minister for Health and the regulator have to be sort of commended for that, for making that step. But it needs to go further. I think it does need to go into things like making sort of medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro a lot more accessible, a lot more affordable. There's even evidence coming out now that as well as having a sort of a weight loss effect, these medications have a cardioprotective effect and have a cardiovascular effect, which again is huge. And it's I know the jury is still out on these medications as in terms of their long-term sort of side effect profile and etc. But clearly the benefit at the moment in the short term is obvious, and in the long term, with their ability to sort of manage type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular effects shouldn't go unnoticed. So I think you're right, Sinead. Yeah, I think it's something that should be explored by the Department of Health and by the HSC to sort of really make them accessible and really sort of, I suppose, leverage the benefits that they provide. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's how the label is being turned in its head from obesity to health gain, isn't it? In terms of that protective effect, in terms of carrying that extra weight and the impact that has on heart and other organs in the body. So, Kieran, if I might turn to you in terms of the experience that you have had in leadership roles within ICON PLC, an Irish clinical trials multinational company with presence globally. Some of your insights and the trends that you're seeing in terms of clinical trials. Could you share those with us?
Yeah, I mean, in our business, I suppose what we're seeing at the minute is that there are many more drug candidates, with scientific progress and precision medicine and AI, which we're still trying to figure out what it does. There's certainly a lot more opportunities to develop more and more drugs. The big question is, and it's been touched on already, is who pays for it? I think we have more science available to do to develop therapies than we have money to fund them. That will then prompt sort of ethical questions about if you can afford to pay $1 million for a particular shot of medicine that will prolong or improve your life, and somebody can't. What does that say about our society and our values, and how are we going to think about that, and how are we going to address that as we go forward? And we see these discussions all the time, and it's been touched on today. And then that leads on to I think you touched on it, Sinead, and you've mentioned with food. If we can't afford all of these medicines, the other questions are more effort on prevention. Prevention is better than cure. How do we do that? How do we achieve that? What's the role of the state? I mean, the state is very, very heavily involved in medicine at every level. I sometimes wonder how it ended up in the hands of the state. It may not be. It may not be the best model. That the state is both a payer and a provider. Maybe the state should just be a payer, and then it can make those decisions on payment around public decisions such as productivity and avoidance of other costs, and it should let the provision of medicine be more entrepreneurial. I mean, those of us that go to both public and private hospitals, you'll have a very different experience. In a small country like Ireland, and nearly everywhere, everybody that works in a private hospital, or nearly everybody, has come through the public system. I mean, they've all been trained in the same universities and in the same internships and worked in the same place. Yet miraculously, the experience and the productivity is much better in the private setting. So now you're down to, what does it all mean? It's behaviour, it's culture, it's management. And I suppose my job, not being a scientist or a medic, is to try and figure out how to get things done. And I struggle sometimes when you look at it, what we're really talking about here. And we've seen the fabulous report on clinical trials and what it might do for Ireland and the benefits. It's that and anything. We've lots of smart people and we've lots of ideas, and we're very, very strong on the diagnosis of problems. It's a huge change management project to actually try and get these done. And I think because, you touched on it at the start, Gerardine, because of the inherent complexity of medicine, You know, the best way to get things done, in my experience in leading companies, is to get the simplest model, you know, your 80-20 rule or whatever cliche you want to use, is you've got to simplify it. My job is to make complex things as simple as possible, and achieving a good outcome might not be the best outcome, it certainly won't be the perfect outcome. But with all the things we've talked about here, it's quite thought-provoking to see how do we achieve things, and how do we simplify it down and get the most important things. And I generally find that comes down to people. You know, it's people making decisions, it's people taking ownership, it's people caring about things. And I think the bureaucracy of a lot of the state organs, it takes away that decision-making ability. I'm not particularly blaming the individuals. I mean, you know, you make a wrong decision now, and you know, people will hound you and witch hunt you. So there's a fear to, you know, you won't make a wrong decision if you don't make any decision. Seems to be, you know, a lot of the culture you have to deal with, and it's somehow defining the problem, defining what's important in it, and then engaging the people and giving them the accountability to get it done. And to do that across the many silos that you have in healthcare is very hard. It takes a very long time. So there are no easy answers, you know.
And that is an issue, isn't it, in terms of, you know, the extent to which we work in silos, and not only from a clinician perspective, in terms of, you know, each clinician has their own area of expertise and is bringing together within the multidisciplinary teams and understanding what everybody does, you know, for the patient in that patient journey. But also, and that can have impact in terms of the patient, in terms of fragmentation from the patient experience as well. But also, perhaps also in terms of government departments, so you talk about the Department of Education, perhaps also there's a role for the Department of Education and Health to actually come together around that education piece, around health literacy and health promotion, and starting at the youngest level possible, at, you know, kindergarten or preschool level, in terms of that education around food as medicine and health and exercise. And any comments on that, Kieran?
I think you can overcomplicate trying to you know, we look at this and there are so many pieces in it that we say, well, we have to deal with the department of this and that. Look, I mean, our business, look, we do clinical trials and it's one trial at a time. So we are quite transactional and action-focused people and not strategic in some ways. And how do we get things done? Well, we've like 200,000 or 300,000 patients in trials at any given time. And we don't do it on a grand scale by trying to say, oh, let's, you know, have some overarching global, like, you know, the Tip O'Neill, all politics is local, all clinical trials are local, you know. The way you get it done is you need a certain amount of patients, you need data, you need doctors and the support and the nurses that go with it, and you do it hospital by hospital and site by site, you know. You don't sit down and come up with some grand strategic plan of, if we talk to this department or that department, you get boots in the ground and you go to the various hospitals that you've dealt with in the past, and you mine information to the extent that you can, if you have electronic health records, to see where you might go, so it's not just, you know, blindly going forth. But I don't know about yeah, we're going to rely on public policy to do that. I think. I just don't know, is the short answer. I don't have a high level of confidence in that approach, and it's going to come down to all of us taking ownership or
Liam wants to come in there, but I want to come back to you, Kieran, on the clinical trials. But Liam, you wanted to come in there. I think
government policy can help if they, for example, clinical trials about research, right? Make research important in the healthcare system, not a nice to have. It's a should be a critical part of the system. Because again, if you're talking about individual hospitals, individual clinicians who are doing clinical trials, they need to be empowered to do clinical trials, otherwise they can't do it. If it's not important to their career, or if it's not important to their system, if they achieve barriers, they then don't really want to do clinical trials. And you've got a lot of people who are, despite challenges, leading out and doing amazing stuff in Ireland, right? Imagine if they were empowered to do that. They do fantastically well. And there are international predicates. If you look at Denmark, they used to have some of the poorest outcomes in terms of cancer in European level. They did a top-down approach as well. Maybe bottom-up, maybe it's a different culture, but ultimately they changed the dial. They had a cross-departmental approach. They had a cancer trials for all program, which did have an impact and demonstrated impact, and also an economic impact. So I do think I would disagree with that point that a policy can't be useful. It could be useful certainly on the ground when you're talking about clinicians not having any spare time to do research, right? That's what a clinical trial is. So I think that's the critical part. We need to start with that system. And I'm not a clinician, so I'm speaking from the perspective of talking to my colleagues who aren't empowered to do it.
And Liam, as you speak about that, and also Kieran, with your expertise in clinical trials as well, the recent National Clinical Trials Oversight Report, and I know we have somebody who's a member of that, is advocating for clinical trials to be integrated into standard care in everyday practice within our healthcare systems, and highlighting that research-active healthcare systems do deliver better outcomes. But I was struck in that report as well, and I'd love you to comment on that, Kieran, and Liam, also you mentioned Denmark. It highlighted that Ireland was placed 18th out of 24 EU countries in terms of clinical trials conducted per capita in the state. And the same analysis also indicated that the median time between the clinical trial startup and recruitment start date of patients is also slower in Ireland than in Denmark or comparator country. 27 days in Ireland compared to 19 days in Denmark. And Liam, you said that Denmark has turned the dial on that. And Kieran, I wonder why that is. You know, you're a global clinical trials company. You perform the clinical trials for the Pfizer vaccine, for the Moderna vaccine. You know, what's your sense as to why we have such a low per capita clinical trial in Ireland? And what can we do about it?
Again, it comes down to fairly basic things. We've fabulous clinicians and medical people here. They are very much deployed on the front line and work all the time. You would probably, if you talk to clinicians, they'd say if they want to do research, they'd need 20 or 30% of their time to be available to do that. They'd need the support. I mean, it's not just the clinician, it's nurses, it's data managers, it's people in labs, it's images that you might need. So there's a whole sort of framework behind the clinical research. So one is resources; they just don't have as much time to do it. Two, if you're conducting a clinical trial, you need to have the standard of care and the drugs available that you're comparing to. And then you saw Liam's chart saying that there weren't very many of them approved in Ireland, so you may not be able to do a trial here because you want a certain drug to compare the one you're developing to. And if it's not here, you're going to go to Germany or Denmark, right, if they have it. Yeah. Regulatory approval is slow here. It comes back to bureaucracy and sort of ethical approval. These are just behavioural and cultural issues that are embedded in the system. It just takes longer. The report's a really strong report, and it identifies all of these things, and it identifies very clear, tangible, good actions that, if they can be achieved, will certainly should move us towards the Danish model. But we'll see the rubble hit the road when it comes down to, is somebody going to put the resources in to get more clinical people to do them. And it's as simple as that. I mean, clinical research is very much, the kind of brainy stuff on drug development is done by guys like Liam and in labs and in the development of drugs. By the time it gets into we have a molecule. It's been tested enough to have high confidence in safety levels. Now you just want to see what does it do in practice. And it's very much project management of those steps, and that's just it's a process.
And just on the other side of that, in terms of clinician time to engage in clinical trials, what about the other side of it in terms of the patient? Are we reluctant in Ireland to engage in clinical trials, and how do we compare with other populations in terms of how do we incentivize people to be willing to take part in clinical trials? Is there some piece of work we need to do there?
We do so few clinical trials in Ireland that I don't know how much experience I have to actually answer that question in terms of comparing to other countries, because we do very, very, very few here. My sense is that people in Ireland are just as aware and educated of the opportunities generally as anywhere else. And if you go for a diagnosis and come out of your physician's office someday and they tell you of some sort of condition that needs treatment, most people are going to go on to, well, I mean, it used to be Google, now it's Claude or Chat or whatever, and sort of say, what is this, blah blah, and get some background on it. And lots of people I know ask me, oh, you work for ICON, like, I know somebody with this, and is there a clinical trial? I'm like, I'm the last person ICON that understands these things, but so that there's a level of awareness there that I think that's comparable to anywhere else. It's just that the ecosystem to do the trial here isn't as strong as it is in other places.
Liam, did you want to come in there on that?
Well, I just want to make, again, on the positive side. So Austin Duffy, who's an oncologist in the Mater, he set up a kind of, I'm not sure what to describe it, it's kind of like a private operation with a group called START, which is one of the world's largest CROs as well. It was originally, its origins were in Texas, but they have various different operations. It's early phase clinical trials, phase 1 trials. And what's interesting is they've now actually carried out some of the first in-man studies worldwide, actually in the Mater. So again, change the dial. It's not like we're coming after everybody else. They were the start of some of these new experimental drugs, and the first time they were actually put into a person is in the Mater. Now, it's a kind of public-private partnership model. So again, I think those kind of models are interesting. There's some discussion as well. It's called the Align Consortium, which is a couple of different pharma companies in Ireland with Trinity and a few other academic institutions are looking at setting up, a public-private partnership model based on the Norwegian model. It's a very effective model in Norway that you can look at about kind of enhancing innovation, kind of improving access to clinical trials, working closely with industry. So we need to be kind of clever about how we bring people together. Different construct. It's not just like binary, one company partnering with a clinical institution. There's consortia approaches where you've got multiple partners coming together, diagnostics companies, therapeutics, with clinicians. So we need, again, there are multiple examples of these internationally, and we want to adopt it. I think there's an opportunity with the National Life Sciences Strategy to provide a ground for that to happen.
And clinicians will be well clued into what trials are going on as well, and will be able to encourage or outline it for the patients. It won't just be sort of patient engagement, it will also be guided. There's a lot of...
So there's a role there for leadership within our clinical sites in terms of, allocating that time and enabling clinicians to engage in the clinical trials. We've got the science, we've got the expertise, we've got the innovation. Where's the leadership? Where's the, this seems that there's perhaps a role for management and leadership to encourage that. And if I might turn then to digital transformation and AI that we touched upon, Oliver, you mentioned, and Liam, you mentioned as well. Recently, there was a report, I think it was only last week, there was a joint report published by EY and the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland. And I know we have the President, Diarmuid, in the audience, and CEO of the Royal College of Physicians, Audrey, with us this afternoon. But in that context, a survey was conducted on behalf of clinicians, a sample of 500 clinicians in Ireland, to understand to what extent are clinicians using artificial intelligence tools in their daily practice. And the findings were that 58% of clinicians today are using AI. 60% of them are using it weekly, and 1 in 5 are using it on a daily basis. So how are they using those AI techniques and tools? The report found that they are using it for 3 main purposes. 1, to inform clinical reasoning. So I suppose a second opinion. Secondly, to support documentation. And thirdly, also in terms of administration in routine practice. So the report really called for additional training of clinicians in the use of AI tools, coordinated implementation of the use of those tools, and also clearer governance around the use of AI. So I know, Paddy, this is an area that you're working in, so I'd like to turn to you in the first instance in terms of, what's your experience in terms of digital transformation and AI in the clients that you're seeing today?
Yeah, I think I read that report, and I think it was 93% of the physicians surveyed agreed that they would like more training and more competency on it. So they're very obviously aware of it, and I think without sort of those sort of guardrails and that guidance there, I think a lot of the sort of physicians are using it to a certain extent, and because there's no sort of guardrails there, they're using it for different reasons. And I think it's very much, they will agree that it's very much a decision-making process. They can use it to sort of research the best evidence, but I think it certainly doesn't and shouldn't remove their judgment, their clinical judgment, when they adopt AI. But again, it comes down to sort of a lot of sort of the governance structures and the models are there. We know we can input information and we get an output from it. I think it's looking a little bit deeper than that, and in terms of the data that we're putting in, the security of that data. There is a GDPR sort of element to it. And if they really want to sort of implement and start using it, it's sort of looking at the structures around data interoperability and how do we roll that out. So are we using sort of complete records? Is the coding sort of consistent? So and it's really to avoid, it's a crude term, but it's really to really avoid a situation where you have garbage in, garbage out. And I think it's inevitable using AI in healthcare. I think it will, along with sort of, and we might touch on it later on, is electronic health records it will without doubt enable better care, possibly more standardized care, but the benefits of it are sort of becoming evident. But I think at the end of the day, I think you can have the best technology in the world, and we've touched on a few times here about the people element of it, and I think it's really informing clinicians and physicians and all, across the other healthcare professionals across the system is how best to use AI. Really sort of maybe build it into their continuing professional development, their CPD. All clinicians must do it, all healthcare professionals must do it on an annual basis. So it's really sort of tapping into that and making this, yes, this is a good tool to use, but we need to start using it in the right way, and is everyone using it in a consistent and standardized way? And I think then we will, without doubt, reap the benefits from it, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oliver?
I was with my friends at Penang, who I mentioned earlier. So what they're saying they want to do is they want those customers of theirs who are willing to do so, to share data, to put up their entire medical records and data and keep the thing fed. They're building their own AIs, and they want this to be like a personalized doctor for kind of everything. I mean, look, I don't know, is this stuff going to work like this? But our view is that AIs are really going to take over the medical profession and are going to replace a lot of functions that a lot of the medical profession kind of does in terms of advisory, interacting with patients, talking to them, giving them options, making them understand what they're going through. So I think AI is going to be very, very kind of revolutionary. And I think it's going to be interesting, like which are the entities that are going to facilitate AIs in that kind of clinical setting? I don't think it's going to be the medical profession. I don't think, sure, a medical profession, like everybody, is going to have a whole bunch of AI assistants kind of, helping you out and like checking your work and so on. But, the theme to us is more, who's going to kind of consolidate the AI approach from the patient or from a consumer, a well consumer's perspective? Because those people or those entities or those companies or that sector of our economy is going to become very important.
Yeah.
And it's going to drive, I think, the healthcare agenda in a big way. I think, look, you know, a lot of us are old enough to kind of remember the first internet bubble and, you know, the first internet, and like when it all kind of came out and we all got very excited about it. Like, I think AI is way, way bigger than that, way bigger. And I think it's really going to fundamentally change the way a lot of stuff happens. And, you know, just listening to a podcast there was, you know, AI is doing new scientific research, for example. Yeah. And they were saying that, look, they're at the level of undergrads, right? So you know, the immediate comment is, well, you know, told you so. Like, it's, no, they're not really good. But like they're saying, this stuff is changing so fast that they will be smarter than the smartest person, you know, in the room, in the country, within, you know, what is it, months? Is it years? But like, it's happening, and you know, that's going to change. Like, it's going to change society hugely. But I mean, even within our industry and with our sector, it's going to massively change things.
A good example is, well, you used to take a PhD student or maybe 10 years of work to, you know, find the structure of a protein. Nobel Prize won a couple of years back with Demis in terms of AlphaFold.
Yeah.
Now they've formed isomorphic labs to essentially create all known drugs. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah.
And in terms of thinking of the next decade, Oliver, and everybody on the panel here, you know, and just to close on this, because I've just realised the time and I want to open to the floor for a few minutes. So looking at the next decade, what do you think is going to be the biggest disruptor in the health sector?
You know, I would actually be very positive, you know, about the space that we're in. I mean, I know we all kind of struggle with, you know, the inflation or the bureaucracy or, you know, whatever else, but I would be very positive. I think that AI is a huge productivity driver, and in all parts of our industry, it's going to drive productivity, whether it's in pure research or whether it's in, you know, processing claims. And that will ultimately help with this big problem that we all have, which is medical inflation. If through productivity gains we could get medical inflation to kind of come down, it means we can actually put more resources into developing more new stuff and actually helping outcomes. So, you know, one of the things that AI has been talked about is it's the next big productivity drive. And I mean, look, we can already see it in our own companies and our own activities, you know, the productivity that it brings. If it brings that level of productivity to our sector, I think it's going to be a huge thing. And I would say 10 years from now, we won't recognize our industry. It's going to be so different.
Okay, on that note, thank you. I'm going to open it to the floor for any comments or questions for our panel. Thank you.
I'm an academic researcher at Smurfit, and my focus is finance, but I'm currently working on a project that is how patient capital promote the scaling up of a business. So I'm particularly interested in the global health industry, because patient capital is kind of investment that may last for 10 to 20 years, because they focus on long-term outcomes, not just the short-term variations. In the health industry, like to develop a kind of medication, it may take like 10 years or more than 10 years. So I think patient capital does match up with the industry's future. And like for patient capital, currently there are only mainly three types of patient capital, like the insurance funds, the sovereign wealth funds, which is the government-owned national savings, kind of like that kind of funds, and the pension funds. I understand that the insurance is getting involved, but how about the other two types, the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds? And if they are getting involved within this global health industry, how do they match up with the complexity of the industry, and how should regulators and policymakers get involved to help this process? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Oliver, are you well qualified to answer that question?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't heard that term before, patient capital. You know, another aspect of it is health savings accounts. which work really well in Singapore. I haven't seen them anywhere else in the world, but this is basically, it's like a funded kind of savings scheme. So insurance is kind of money in, money out. The premiums I get from you today, I used to pay somebody else's claims. Whereas in a health savings account set up, the money that you put in, it's your money, it's ring-fenced, it's invested, and then you spend it later. But it's also intergenerational, so like it's spent kind of across generations. That works, but there's a huge pot of money in health savings accounts. Now, they only work if governments give you a tax break, because otherwise, why would anybody put money into a health savings account? You'll only do it if you get a tax break. And this probably brings me back to the lack of joined-up thinking that we have in many places around public and private health together. There was an interesting, really seminal paper written by McKinsey, I'm going to say about 25 years ago, saying that the almost pure private healthcare system in the US and the almost pure public healthcare systems in Europe would converge into blended systems. And that's kind of what's happening. Medicare and Medicaid are getting bigger in the US, whereas in Europe, we can't keep going on 100% public health and free public social security health, and the private sector is becoming a larger part. But that's almost happening kind of by default. I'm not aware of many jurisdictions, China being the exception that I spoke about earlier, where this is actually policy, where there is actually a long-term horizon. Like here in Ireland, we're particularly bad at long-term policy planning. So like, when you talk about something that's going to cross like a generation or be 20 years, like we're just not at the races here. But that's what's needed, is like public and private are, our Department of Health is still extremely ideological. They still view the private healthcare industry as an aberration that someday, once they have enough money on the public side, they will get rid of us. And that's still an ideology.
Not in your lifetime, Oliver.
Huh?
Sure, not in your lifetime.
Not if I have anything to do with it.
So I'm just very conscious of time, and I know we've got to move to the next theatre. But Dermot, I know you had a question.
It's really just,
for the panel.
it's been a fantastic. So Dermot O'Shea is my name. I'm actually a geriatrician. I'm president of the College of Physicians in Ireland, and it's been an extraordinarily interesting afternoon. Can I say, Gerardine, brilliantly chaired. But I guess just to be brief, our greatest strength in Ireland should be our size. We've heard people referencing Denmark and Norway, but we're 5.5 million of population. And that gives us an enormous potential to collaborate. And we should be way better in collaboration between public and private sector. We should be way better about how communities and acutes interact. And we should be better at integrating lots of things across pharmacists, AI, etc., etc. And it sits in education, training and research. And Liam, I think what you're doing is immense with the All-Ireland Institute in cancer research. And I think I look at the things that we've done through training and education in the country. I had to leave this country to go, when I qualified 40 years to go to get training, I had to leave to get the research done. And the only certainty was that I would not be back in Ireland, because there were not jobs. We've come an awful long way, but we could collaborate an awful lot better than we do right across the spectrum, and I'll leave it at that. I've loads I could ask.
Dermot, that's a wonderful comment and feedback to close our session. So I know there's lots more conversation to have, perhaps over drinks later. Now we're all invited back to the plenary session where we began for our final keynote, and then everybody is welcome to join us in the foyer for drinks and hopefully continue this fabulous conversation. But before we do, I want to say a huge bula bus and a huge thank you and Garamila Mahagat to our fabulous stellar panel. Thank you so much for giving so generously of your time. Thank you.
Thank you.